Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about one of my favorite accessory movements. And this is a big enough exercise that there are some coaches, and I think it's a little gimmicky for them to say this, who say, no, this shouldn't be an accessory movement, this should be treated as a main movement. To which I would respond with, of course, that's silly because main movements are movements that you hit one rep maxes on, right? And I'm not even talking about just for powerlifters, I'm talking about in general. Primary exercise is one in which you feel comfortable lifting maximum weights. Accessory movements are exercises we do for general hypertrophy, either for overall size or for targeting specific weak areas. So I count this as an accessory movement because it's largely a glute exercise that puts a very large amount of emphasis on the hamstrings, the spinal erectors, the abs, everything else. But one of the reasons I like this exercise is that in spite of the fact that you can use a very large amount of weight on it, it's still a pretty easy exercise to recover from, and that matters. It matters a lot. When we're talking about the ability to do large amounts of training volume for hypertrophy, we need to be selecting exercises that we can recover from. And for people who are on lower volume training, that really isn't as big of a deal. So that's a point I do want to make. When we're talking about things like novice lifters can't handle large volumes of training. They're not strong enough to have any sort of real work density. And because volume isn't just about reps and sets, it's about total workloads and everything occurring. Most novice lifters just aren't that strong. I mean, if you squat 200 pounds and you deadlift 300 and you're a man, you're just not that strong yet. So therefore, we don't have to spend a lot of time worrying about this stuff to the same extent. And I'm not saying we shouldn't, but it becomes less important because you're just not capable of generating enough workload in 10 minutes or 15 minutes of your workout that it's really a major concern. But the more advanced we get, we do need to pay attention to things like this. But an exercise like this, even though it allows for pretty heavy weights to be utilized, in my case, I'm working with 375 here for multiple sets of 10 deep into my workout. Still a decent amount of weight. So we can load a pretty large amount of weight on this exercise, but because there is no compression of the spine, we're not really dealing with an axial loading effect. But it does work the entire posterior chain. It works our entire lower body. Now, it's predominantly a glute exercise, but the interesting thing as far as it being a glute exercise go, it works the glutes in a way that is a very, very different strength curve than what we would get on a lot of exercises most of us are doing for our glutes. Because usually, what do we think of as the basis of glute training? Well, some sort of squat and some sort of hip hinge, basically a deadlift. And squats and deadlifts work the glutes effectively, but if you look at where the tension is placed on it, it tends to be at just certain points in the movement pattern. And particularly like a deadlift. If you look at a deadlift, the glutes do most of the work when you are down at the bottom of the deadlift, right? When your torso is basically bent over. Very similar to how you are starting at the bottom of this glute bridge. You're bent over into a hip hinge. But in this case, as you thrust it upwards, the exercise becomes more difficult at the lockout. Usually on something like a deadlift, what happens? It's a little easier as far as glute activation goes at the top. And in fact, when you get to the very top of a deadlift, which is the hip position you're in at the top of this, the glutes no longer actually have much of an active role. They do up until a few inches before that, but at the very top of the exercise, the glutes aren't really doing any real work. They're helping get you to that point. Glutes can help you get to the point to where you lock, but they don't play an active role. Whereas on this particular exercise, they are at peak contraction. They're at peak contraction there. Well, a squat, we see the exact same thing happening. We see the same thing on a squat. The deeper you go in a squat, the more glute activation you get. And the glutes work very, very hard at the bottom of a squat. But the further up you get, they play less of a role. They play a more passive role and a more stabilizing role the higher we get towards the top of a squat. So again, what we're finding here is that we are doing something with our glutes. We're placing peak contraction and peak tension. That would be a better word. Peak tension is placed on the glutes at a point in a movement pattern where on other exercises, the glutes would be disengaged largely in terms of the tension being placed on them. So this gives us a unique training effect. So if someone was looking for maximizing glute development, we could look at an exercise like this and say, hey, this exercise trains your glutes in a strength curve and a tension curve that is almost the opposite of these other traditional classic movements that are big exercises. While in and of itself it is still a big multi-joint exercise in which we can move a lot of weight. So it gives us a unique training effect, and for someone who has lagging glutes, an exercise like this could actually help bring them up very, very quickly. Because again, it's such a novel training response versus the other big lifts that we do. And everyone should be squatting and deadlifting, and I want to make that clear. I don't consider those optional exercises. Now, that doesn't mean you do the exact classic version of them. I put most of my clients starting out on box squats and sumo deadlifts. Not saying some of my clients don't still do back squats and conventional deadlifts. They do. Some of them do all of them. Some of my clients do 12 different deadlifts. But the point here is that we do these exercises, but this can really help well-round everything out. Pardon the pun as far as well-rounded glutes. But this is a value, and this is a value for injury prevention. This is a value for sports performance. And you look at this, again, we're helping develop the glutes more effectively through a different strength curve. This is going to help produce better stability. It's going to make you more stable. It's going to make you more injury resistant. And particularly when we look at the other elements of it, because what else does it require us to do? There's a lot of abdominal work happening here, right? There's a lot of abdominal work. Your abs have to bridge the weight at the top, hence on the glute bridge. They're having to support this weight up at the lockout also. It also trains us to maximally contract the glutes when the erectors are having to bridge the weight also. All right, this can also train us to utilize the glutes more effectively to stabilize the lower back more. So when you look at the ab involvement and the glute involvement, this is an exercise that could actually help protect your lower back in the way that it builds you up. All right, this is a great injury prevention exercise. Great injury prevention exercise. And for me, it's become a mainstay in my own training. And I don't necessarily have all my clients do it, but a lot of my clients even do it, depending upon where they're at in their training. So again, this is an exercise that if you wanted to add something in to bring a new dynamic to your lower body training and to your overall strength and athleticism, I think this would be a good movement. Now, it doesn't mean it's automatically going to carry over to the squat and the deadlift, because that gets asked a lot. And for some people it will, and for some people it won't. What I would say is that maybe on your deadlift, it's only going to help for people who maybe have trouble with the lockout. Right? If you have trouble on the lockout, it's probably going to help you a lot. If you don't, you may not see much real difference. But in terms of injury prevention, I think it's very, very real. Then we have the added benefit of additional hamstring work. Because by and large, hamstrings are definitely one of the muscles that we see that people have that are underdeveloped in general. And that tends to go hand in hand with glutes. And if we're talking about getting as strong as possible, athletic as possible, and having the lowest injury risk, hamstrings are an important muscle. They are an important muscle. And they're one that's often neglected. And actual hamstring weakness is usually the cause of knee injuries. It's a big factor in people's knee injuries. So when we start looking at the different things that we're concerned about with different athletes, field athletes, contact sport athletes, strength athletes, and you look at common muscle weaknesses, this exercise addresses them. But it addresses them with a big, heavy multi-joint exercise where we can load a lot of weight. Now granted, it's through a short range of motion, but it's still a lot of weight can be loaded. It's scalable easily, it's loadable easily. So when you start looking at general hypertrophy exercises, not even smaller specific ones, you look at what a lot of people look for when they're picking, even for novice lifters. What do they look for in exercise selection? They want exercises that allows us to utilize a heavy weight through a reasonable range of motion that is easily loadable and that's trainable with progressive overload. And I'd say this fits the bill. It fits the bill because you have a very quick progression curve on this. One of the things that everyone notices who does this exercise, you progress really fast on it early on if you haven't done it. It is one of these exercises where you can increase your strength 50% sometimes in a relatively short period of time. So when you look at that from a progressive loading perspective, this makes it a really good overall lower body hypertrophy exercise to throw in. Right? It makes it a really good exercise for that. In addition to just building support musculature in a way that can help prevent injuries based around common muscle weaknesses. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.